welcome to the 18th Annual Newburyport Literary Festival. This is actually the final presentation of our very first hybrid festival. Friday and Saturday, we were in real life in Newburyport, Massachusetts for the first time since the pandemic, which we're really thrilled about. And we thank all the authors and volunteers who made that happen. And today we have been live streaming all day. This is our 8th event and we're so excited about it. I want to call out our sponsors. We are eternally grateful to the Institute for Savings and the Newburyport Bank, both local banks. They've made this event possible since 2005. We also have received funding from the Massachusetts Cultural Council, as well as local council chapters in Newburyport, Newbury, West Newbury, Georgetown, Raleigh, and Salisbury. Thank you so much. The Yellow School was a huge supporter of the festival this year, and the Mass Center for the Book partnered with us to bring important programming to our event, and we appreciate that so much as well. I also want to tell you about our independent bookstore partners, the Bookshop of Beverly Farms and Jabberwocky. I'm going to put the links to those bookstores in the chat. They have all the books that we are talking about today, and that we have talked about during the entire festival, so check those out, or your own independent bookstore. Thank you also to A Mighty Blaze. We're live streaming on Facebook there, and we have been all day. We appreciate their support. And they have been part of our festival since we started doing these virtual sessions. So we're so excited to be back with them again and appreciate their generosity. I am going to introduce to you our moderator now, and she is a regular festival moderator with a focus on food. Christina Koliander is a writer and editor, an avid home cook who also leads a monthly writing workshop near her home in Vermont. She has presented at the Boston Book Festival with a panel of authors discussing food and fiction, and for many years authored the nationally recognized blog, My Vermont Kitchen. I'm going to turn it over to you, Chris, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Leslie. And thank you, the Newburyport Literary Festival. My birthday's in April, but the last weekend in April is always my favorite weekend of the year because it's just so much fun that book readers and authors are brought together. So thank you. And I'm very excited about today's panel with Jennifer Close and J. Ryan Stradal. So let me introduce them to you. Jennifer Close is the best-selling author of Girls in White Dresses, The Smart One, The Hopefuls, and what we're talking about today, Marrying the Ketchups. Born and raised on the North Shore of Chicago, she is a graduate of Boston College and received her MFA in fiction writing from the New School. She now lives in Washington, D.C. and teaches creative writing at George Washington University. And J. Ryan Stradal is the author of the New York Times bestseller, Kitchens of the Great Midwest, and the national bestseller, The Lager Queen of Minnesota. His writing has appeared in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Guardian, Granta, the Rumpus, and the Los Angeles Review of Books. His debut book, The Kitchens of the Great Midwest, won the American Booksellers Association Indies Choice Award for Adult Debut Book of the Year. Born and raised in Minnesota, he now lives in California with his family. So welcome to the two of you. Thank you for being here. As someone, I just wanted to let the readers or the potential readers who are watching today, if anyone has ever worked in a restaurant as a waitress or has ever worked in a family restaurant, I have done both. Both of these books were so much fun. You took me down memory lane of my waitressing days. It was just so much fun to relive, having dinners with your coworkers and then the after shift drinks. So that was very fun. So I wanted to get started. When I sat down and was working on my questions for the session, I was thinking about how different your books were, but then I realized that there was a lot of similarities. You both have a restaurant, which I considered a character at the center of the story, and you had multi-generational families. So I'm wondering, I wanted to talk to the two of you about how the stories began. Did you start with the story? Did you start with the characters? And Jennifer, let's start with you first. Like, where did this start?
The first scene I ever wrote was from Gretchen's point of view, who's the granddaughter of Bud Sullivan, who opened the restaurant. And I knew it was sort of like it ended up not being the first scene of the book, but it was sort of a grand exit from New York, going home. And it's funny because I actually listened to a podcast with Ryan talking about the idea of like inheriting a restaurant and what happens if you are not interested, but it's always there and it's what you've done. So that was sort of the first part. I knew she was going back to work at this restaurant, and I knew she was both thankful and not thrilled about it. So it was always there for her, and it was not what she imagined doing. So that was where it started for me. And then the rest of the family just kind of jumped in around.
And Ryan, what about your book? Because you you live in Los Angeles now, but you keep revisiting Minnesota.
Yeah, I
So
just
how
can't
did this
quit.
start for you?
Yeah, I just can't quit the Midwest. I thought of the setting first. I'd always wanted to set at least a part of a book in a supper club. In each of my last two books, there was a supper club scene that was removed because it was extraneous to the plot. And so, take it out of this one. Yeah, it's in the title. Yeah, I worked in a supper club as a teenager, only back of house, never worked front of house. I just didn't have the ability to multitask well enough to work front of house. But I loved it. And growing up where I did in southeastern Minnesota, the supper club was the nicest restaurant in the area. It's where you spent your birthdays, where you celebrated anniversaries, graduations. It's where you took relatives that you never saw that came a long way to visit. It was the nice restaurant in the area. It was, as Mariel puts it, the place where people choose to spend the most memorable nights of their lives. And yeah, I've always wanted to write about that. They're really special places, and generally they're not making more of them. It's a vanishing way of rural Midwestern life, and I just wanted to get it down while I could.
So Jennifer, for those who are not in the restaurant business, explain the title of your book, because when I would told people, kind of explain the book that I was reading, I sometimes got some quizzical looks as to what that means. It was a family named Ketchup, so explain that for people who haven't worked in the restaurant industry.
Yeah,
and you did a video on YouTube about it.
Yeah, I did. You can always tell who's worked in a restaurant, who hasn't, because people are either like, oh yeah, or they just look at you like they misheard. And I think because Girls in White Dresses had a lot of weddings in it, people thought I was writing about, so I think they were like, the Ketchup family is having a wedding. It is, and this was always the title of the first section of the book, but it was not the title of the actual book for a long, I really resisted it. So when you have ketchup on the table and they're half empty, you take them to the back at the end of the night and you combine them, and it's so gross and it's so magical. And it's like, I just, when I first started working at a restaurant, when they were training me in the side work, it had never once occurred to me that that's what happened. I'd never thought about why the ketchup was always full on the table. And so, yeah, it's one of those things, you sometimes see it happening in the back, you're kind of supposed to wait for everyone to go. So, and I actually always really liked it. It was my favorite piece of side work because it's kind of satisfying. So,
yeah. And was that always the title of your book?
No, so it was the title of the first section, and I knew I wanted it to be in there. The title of the book, which I loved for so long, was Wait, which I realize now is not the best title, but there's a whole storyline.
W-A-I-T or W-E-I-G-H-T?
And waiting for all this, So I really thought it was just so clever. And my editor just kept gently saying, can we call it Marrying the Ketchups? And for a long time, I just kept saying, no, I really don't like that as the title. And then at some point in the middle of the pandemic, I feel like I was just kind of like beaten down, and I was like, yeah, call it whatever you want. But then once we started calling it that, I did get really attached to the title, and now I can't, I don't know why I thought Wait was the right title. So it makes me happy.
Yeah, and I noticed you swapped it. Wait's the title of the first section now. So you still have to have Wait.
I saved it.
Yeah.
Sometimes you think you have like a genius title or idea, and everyone's just like, no, we don't see that.
Yeah.
So Ryan, coming from Minnesota, the land of supper clubs, talk about supper clubs. Like you kind of described it when you were talking about writing the book, that's the place where everyone gathered. Did you have a favorite one growing up?
Yeah, the one I ended up working at, the Steamboat Inn in Prescott, Wisconsin, which was right across the river from where I lived. Yeah, I love the Steamboat Inn. Had a dock steamboat on the St. Croix River and a permanent in-ground restaurant. I actually set one of the scenes in Kitchens of the Great Midwest there when it still existed. Now it's completely destroyed. It's gone. Like it's a whole, like they not only closed the restaurant, but tore it down. They wiped it off the face of the earth. It's terrifying.
Oh.
But it did live long enough to host a scene in my first novel. But yeah, that was the place that had, you know, the most exotic food in the area, as far as I was concerned, things like frog legs, and classic American cuisine. You know, the best steak in the area, the best prime rib, you name it. Yeah, it was. It was a special place, and I got to interview my former boss as research for this book.
Oh, wow.
Mike Rowan, who's now retired and living in Florida, and made him relive some of his most traumatic moments.
What were some of the questions that you asked him for the research?
What were some of your most traumatic moments? Yeah, just like, you know, because I'd heard stories about it from a buddy of mine, Pat Rowan, who I worked with. You know, just like, asked my dad about Mother's Day last year. You know, I just never got around to it, but I did finally, you know, 25, 30 years later. There was a Mother's Day where, you know, first of all, if you work in the restaurant industry, Mother's Day is already really scary. It's a time when people don't normally go out to eat, and they go out to eat with people they may not be getting along with. It's really tough already. And so one Mother's Day at the Steamboat Inn, a logging truck jackknifed on the road, and the one road leading up to the Steamboat Inn. So they're sitting there going, where's the crowd? You know, it's 9, then 9:30, then 10 a.m., then 10:30, then 11. Then they finally clear the logging truck, and everybody arrives at once, all expecting to be seated immediately. They're mad, they're hungry, they have their moms with them, who are fatter and hungrier, I'm sure, and they just have to deal with it. They just have to figure this out. And I think someone had the idea, like, everyone gets free ice cream, which helped. So yeah, I use that story. That story's in the book. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. So speaking on the topic of food, so I love reading about food in novels. And so I just want to throw out some of the food that was in your books. A brandy old fashioned, which I think that sounds so delicious. A relish tray, a sandwich loaf, which Jennifer, you have to explain what that is. But I'm wondering, because those were because your books take place like you have time frames, you know, back one generation of the family, and then the contemporary times. So did you do a lot of food research, or did you rely on your own memories of food that you grew up with that you saw in the restaurants? Jennifer, why don't you talk about that?
Mine was all
First of all, what's a sandwich loaf for those of us?
I will talk about it because it's delightful. It's a delightful thing to try. I was nodding as if the relish trays were in my book, because I do love a good relish tray, and it's made me so happy reading Ryan's book. A sandwich loaf is, you take a loaf of bread and you slice it horizontally, and you fill it with like tuna salad, chicken salad, ham salad, and then you frost it with like a cream cheese frosting. So when you slice it, you get a little bit of each filling. It sounds so gross. It is the most delicious. I was a picky eater when I was younger, and this is something that my family used to have at showers and like baby showers and wedding showers, and I have always loved it. And the place I named is real. In Wilmette. It's no longer there. Sadly, it was a family catering business that shut down. But the number of people that have read the book from the area that have reached out about the sandwich loaf makes me so happy. All of my stuff was family recipes. I talk about Velveeta and meatloaf, which I was in my 20s before I realized that wasn't like a standard ingredient. I thought it was in every meatloaf, and it's in every meatloaf I make. Teddy is the character I gave most of the food stuff to, and he makes a pasta that I make. He talks about peanut butter and bacon on toast, just like some real Midwestern delicacies. But yeah, it was all of mine was stuff that I had eaten and enjoyed eating and make. And no research. Just
what about you, Ryan? You must have taken yours from the supper clubs that you would go to.
Yeah, and I wrote most of the book during the pandemic, so I had to do it from memory, whether if I wanted to or not. But I grew up going to supper clubs, and I was able to hit a few in fall 2019 to just refresh my memory. But yeah, no, it's a lifetime of memories in there. So yeah, the only thing is I just kind of had to choose what would go on this restaurant's relish tray, because they vary. Supper clubs are always locally, independently owned by, usually a family, not always the family that started it, but a family. And they'll put their own spin on it. Yeah. It's always a platter or lazy Susan of raw things, but they could include pickled herring, pickled watermelon rind. I've heard tell of pickled chicken gizzards. Yeah. So yeah, whatever the flavor of the month is, according to the owner, yeah, that can end up on the relish tray. But one of the things I love about it is that it's free, and it's supposed to be free. Some places are starting to charge for it, but it's supposed to be free. So you walk in and you get this plate of free food. So it's like you're at someone's home, and I think they really, supper clubs really make an effort to make you feel like you're more a guest in a home than a customer in a transactional relationship. And this, starting with the relish tray and the basket of bread, yeah, that's enough. Like, there's been times where I've been half full before I even hit the salad bar, let alone the main course.
So this is a question for the two of you. What do you think about, what is it about having a restaurant as sort of the center of the piece that makes for a good story and makes for a good novel? Ryan, why don't you take that first?
Oh, okay. I think they're inherently dramatic. First of all, they bring together people that wouldn't be together otherwise. You give them a common goal, but also individual goals. There's just a natural tension there. There's a ticking clock always.
It's true.
Yeah, there's demands. There's, it's all the basic ingredients for drama in one spot. Yeah. You have desire. Yeah. You have protagonists, antagonists that take different forms at different times. Yeah. You have expectations from the boss on down to the staff, front of house, back of house, different cauldrons of relationships that can turn on a dime. Yeah. So yeah, and I haven't even gotten to the customers yet. Yeah. It's all staff.
That's a whole other kettle of fish.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's been a lot of movies and TV that have bore that out, that have demonstrated that, hey, restaurant work is an inherent forage of drama. And I'm just glad that there are more books set in that world, because I never tire of it. If there's one subject I love reading about in fiction, it's food.
Jennifer, what do you think? What makes a
drama.
restaurant a great location for a book or a movie? Because it's great.
There's so much drama. There's people date, they break up, the staff, it's like, it just is. And if you'd add family stuff to that, it's just, and also there's an element of, I think, maybe different from other jobs, the shift drink, that you are sort of hanging out with these people. So it just is so fun. The restaurant I worked in had endless amounts of drama and couples and breakups and all of that. But my friend in DC, when I started writing this, was running a restaurant, and the stories she used to tell were just amazing. They were just so fun. They're more fun if you're not involved and you can just listen to them. But, and I also love books about food and set in restaurants. I could read them forever. So, yeah, I think that's just fun to read about.
Both of you sort of touched on it just a tiny bit, but your books have your multi-generational families, but you also, when you work in a restaurant, you have the family that you choose. You're so tightly wound. So talk a little bit about that with the coworkers and the different levels of that. What do you think about that, Jennifer? Because you had a lot of different people working in the restaurant.
Yeah, and there were so many points of view that ended up getting cut out of the book, because also during the pandemic I kind of lost my way. So at one point I was like, every server has a chapter, like it was just all over. But yeah, it's just, you get to know these people so well, and especially if you're at a place where you've worked for years, they're really good friends. The restaurant where I worked at, I feel like it's almost like the same way I feel about like a college or a high school group. It's like you went through this thing together, so you're just sort of bound in this way, and they've probably seen you cry when you drop something in the kitchen. It's just there's just like, you've been sort of through war together in a way. So you're bound to each other.
Yeah, that's so true. Ryan, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think
The family that you choose.
Yeah, everything Jennifer said is totally true. And in a supper club, it's more likely also you'll have employees that have been there a lot longer, not just family members. Well, sometimes they're extended family, but employees like my character in the book. Boy, what's her name? It's been a while since I was writing this last September, but I've got this great server in the book who's at the restaurant for like 50 years, and she's based on somebody I met when doing research, like who had been a waitress at the same supper club for 40 years. And it's more often you'll see that at supper clubs than you will in a lot of other types of restaurants, because, well, if you know the owners, you might be friends with the family or become friends with the family, then you kind of become part of the family. And I was talking to a supper club owner who was, I don't know, complaining about the way things are going, where like kids now go to college. It used to be that like a local high school graduate would come in here and just decide to work here and be here for 40 years. Whether like back of house, front of house, either back and forth, work at the bar. People would just come and just start working at this restaurant, and now everyone just wants to leave. Like they have to constantly rehire people. Like the staff turnover is way higher than it was like even 30 years ago. So yeah, that's one adjustment I heard a couple of supper club owners say they had to make, and it affected the realm. It affected the what's the word? The not joie de vivre, esprit de corps. That's the French term I'm looking for. Probably affected the joie de vivre too, if it affects the esprit de corps. But in any case, yeah, it does become a family of choice. And what's neat about it is when these multiple generations become involved. When you have servers that are in their 70s and 80s working alongside high school kids, like working their first section.
There was this woman who worked at the restaurant I worked at for years, into her 80s. And she was so funny. Her name was Eunice, but she used to yell sugar. She never swore. She could be a little cranky with us, but she took all of our addresses at college and would send us $5 on our birthday.
Oh,
It was just like, it was so funny. It was like, you do like me, because she'd always be a little like, the summer kids that came in, but feel like a family. Yeah.
Oh, that's a sweet story.
That's awesome.
Both
Lois
of your
Strunk, that's my character's name, Lois Strunk. I'm sorry.
Oh, yes. Both of your books also had grief as a theme throughout the book, whether it was death or loss of some sort, divorce. So talk a little bit about that. Jennifer, I don't know, can we say, like, kind of start with something?
It does start with the death of the founder, which I think sort of shakes up the whole thing. They just sort of feel really lost because this patriarch has died, and it's right after 2016. And yeah, so my favorite kinds of books are the ones where it's funny, and then while you're not looking, the author kind of sideswipes you with something more serious, because I just think humor can get to grief. So I just have always loved combining those, and that's and Ryan does it too. I mean, I cried on the train yesterday or on Friday reading this. I got to a very sad scene, but I just think it goes together more than most people think. Humor and I think that grief is so strange and odd, and there's always funny little things. So I hope my book is funny, but I hope that's sort of what I want to do. Like the reader with grief. That sounds mean.
And Ryan, I will agree. Yes, there is a rather sad scene in your book. Yeah. So what do you think about that, bringing that into your book, the grief part?
Absolutely. I did the same thing Jennifer did with my first book, Kitchens of the Great Midwest. I have this great character who's just like the patriarch in a lot of ways in Jennifer's story, and I kill him immediately. And in a far less concise and focused way than Jennifer wrote her chapter. Her chapter was it was so efficient and so well done and really poetic, like segueing it with the Cubs playoff victory. And I spread mine over a longer period of time, but I did the same thing. Like, let's just start right away with some grief. I had a lot of people tell me afterwards, you killed my favorite character in the book immediately. or people who were confused because they're like, wait a second, he just killed the main character on page 20. Like, what are you doing? So either way, I just wanted to throw people in the deep end. I was processing my own grief at the time, and it just seemed to me like that's how I wanted to proceed. Let's start from there. let's find the laughs along the way, because I agree with
Mm,
her that you got to have both.
mm,
I mean,
mm.
I certainly have both in my own life, and it, I just like a journey as a reader that has high highs and low lows. Yeah,
Yeah,
laugh
yeah,
out loud and get misty while reading a book. I feel like that's mission accomplished, and
yes,
I have the
absolutely.
same aims for my own writing.
Yeah. Well, both of you accomplished that quite well. I appreciate it both. Ryan, there's a question in the chat. So before we continue on, please explain for those who don't know, what is a supper club? And
Oh
was
boy.
that more of a summertime thing, or are they a year-round restaurant?
They're usually year round. They kind of kick into high gear in the summer though, because a lot of them are in resort areas.
Mm.
So yeah, like my character Julia says, summer vacation is an oxymoron for her, growing up in a supper club, but that's not always true. There are plenty that are year round, but even so, they're popular summer destinations. I'll let my character Mariel describe it. I got it right here. Every summer weekend, her horseshoe-shaped bar and its wood-paneled lounge were packed with people fresh from fishing boats and softball games and cars that had driven up from the cities. It was a place where people chose to be on the most memorable nights of their lives, and it was a pleasure to be at the center of it all. On Mariel's watch, a proper supper club meal began with a free relish tray and basket of bread, with a round of brandy old fashions, and then a lavish amount of hearty cuisine, with fish on Fridays, prime rib on Saturdays, and grasshoppers for dessert.
Mm.
So that's the typical supper club menu. The milieu is typically like rural or on a lake or a river, somewhere pretty. And yeah, they're just classic American restaurants that quite often have been around since Prohibition or thereabouts. They started calling themselves supper clubs in the 40s or 50s. I couldn't quite get that straight in my research, but post-war, yeah. And not because they were exclusive or anything. It was just a name they picked up from somewhere, and it just kind of spread to describe this particular kind of restaurant that had full bar, great food, and entertainment. When they started up, quite a few of them also, did wedding banquets, you name it. Just they were in event spaces. There are places where people came to see live music and dance and spend a whole night and not just a meal. So kind of like dinner theater, some of them. But overall, yeah, just a really unique place where, for its community, they were the third space for so many people. The place where you could see your friends and neighbors outside of work or home and have a drink, have a meal, and do some dancing, and maybe stay out a little too late.
And that's a reminder, if for any viewers, if you have any questions, you can put them in the Q&A. So Jennifer, you've touched upon this a little bit, and Ryan said you were writing this last year. You wrote this during the pandemic, and Ryan, you may have started during the pandemic. So what was it like writing a book about families and restaurants when no one was going to restaurants and some people weren't seeing their families? What was that like? I think I was thinking about this the other day. It's like, as writers, you have this like life that you live in, and then you go back to your own life when you're done writing for the day. But it's like your own life was different during the pandemic. So what was that like?
It was
it
so sad. I missed restaurants so much. There's one scene I'm thinking of in particular where I have one of the characters go and eat at the bar. And I had to go back and cut a lot of this down. The scene was like 5 pages too long because I was like, and then she ordered this. Oh, the dirty martini was like this. And this is what she got. Like, I was so jealous of her. And it was like both fun and kind of killed me because coming up with the menu was really fun. And yeah, I think there were parts when I went on a little too long because I just really missed it. I love eating out and I love the noise and the busyness and, the delicious food. So it was like both wonderful and awful at the same time.
I can imagine. And Jay, Ryan, what was your experience like? Did you write this in 2020 or 2020 started? Mm-hmm.
You nailed it, Jennifer. I started writing in May of 2019 and I finished it last September. So there was a pretty long stretch of time I wasn't going to any restaurants, let alone supper clubs. And man, I missed them. At least I got to go to this restaurant every day in my imagination. But yeah, just like Jennifer, I was so envious of the people that got to eat there. Like they're describing these prime rib platters, and I'm just going, I don't know when I'm going to see one of those again. You know, I'm just going to have to back away from the screen and like take a few deep breaths. Yeah.
Mm,
I'm so
mm.
envious of these people. It's enraging. Yeah.
Oh. Um, so both of the restaurants in your book saw change, moving with the times, keeping up with the new trendy restaurants. Jennifer, the restaurant that was next door to Sullivan's, I could just like picture it with the trendy restaurant, and everyone wants to sort of keep up with the Joneses. So talk about moving the restaurants forward in your books, and it was also sort of taking them the newer generation, moving away from the older generation, and maybe why you decided to do that, move with the times and not stay in. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, writing that restaurant next door was really fun. It was a brewery. I mean, I just think it's interesting the way that trends come in, and there's, you go to some places that just are sort of stand still in time, and you feel like, especially restaurants where, where I worked, you used to be able to smoke inside, and that is like, and so there's also just this feel of like, there's been a lot that's happened. And I think it goes both ways. Like sometimes those are so nice to revisit because it reminds you of like times before, and sometimes it feels really stale. And so yeah, there was a push and pull with the younger generation and the older generation in this book of like, how do you change it, but a lot of your customers still want prime rib, and I mean, it's like this, you know what are you going to do? But the new restaurant next door, the brewery, I did have fun making it a little ridiculous. I still would have eaten everything on the menu with like the mini cheeses and all of that. I was like, I mean, I'm sure it's delicious, but the kind of crazy beer and how serious they got with it, I was sort of, I think I would choose Sullivan's over that kind of place any day. So
Right, I would too. Jay
Awesome.
Ryan,
Yeah,
moving
yeah.
forward.
The neighboring place reminded me a little bit of a defunct restaurant in Chicago called Band of Bohemia. Did you ever go there?
Mm-mm.
It was the only Michelin rated brew pub at one point.
Oh.
Yeah, doesn't exist anymore, but yeah. Yeah. Anyway, long story short, yeah, very similar thing. Every generation's got to make it their own somehow.
Mhm.
And one of the things that I was wrestling with while writing this book was the very notion of legacy. I became a father while writing this book as well, for the first time. And so suddenly I thought, oh boy, it might, some strangers aren't just going to pile up my stuff when I die and burn it in the backyard. Like now I know who's going to do it. And so I thought a lot about the nerve I had bringing a child into this world, and just how I can prepare him for it, and how likely it's going to be, given the arc history follows, that he's going to reject a lot of what I value and consider nostalgic about, what I'm nostalgic for. And supper clubs might very well be among them. I mean, the ensuing generations will have value systems oriented towards their own needs, preferences, and survival mechanisms. And who are we to say what those ought to be? It's very likely that Audio, when he's my age, he'll look back on things I enjoy and consider them immoral, if not destructive. And these are things that I consider to be totally fun, like prime rib platters and 15-minute showers. So yeah, thinking about that and trying to orient like the final generation of my book, someone who's graduating from college right before the pandemic, like what's their value system in the world that they want to see, in the world that they can thrive in, and how does a 100-year-old restaurant fit into that? That was the challenge I put out for myself in creating that character.
Congratulations on your baby, and it's a boy.
Yeah, his name's Auden.
And when was he born, or how old is he?
December 2019. So he's a toddler now. Yeah.
Yeah,
he's already faster than me, and God willing, he'll stay that way.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
So what was it like looking at your character's relationship with food? Because I thought it was interesting, like especially in Jennifer, in your book with Teddy, and he was always like cooking things, and I thought that I just would think as an author, looking at the characters and looking at food. What was that like for you? That may be a little existential.
It was so fun, but it was very, it actually, and it's in there a little bit, but it was like, I had to be careful. You could write a whole book on people's relationships with food and healthy,
Mhm.
unhealthy. And there's a mention in there that the grandmother never really let herself enjoy food because there is so much with women and food and all of that. And I also loved the idea, this was fun because I just loved the idea that there was a restaurant family that no one cooked. They didn't have to. That was the extension of their kitchen. So Teddy was the only one that cooked, but just there's one part I write about where they have certain things like pasta absorbs grief and tacos are for celebrating, which I sort of feel is true. There is like food adds so much to it if it's a part of your life. I mean, I guess there are some people that don't really care. I'm not one of them. So it's really fun to think about that and just to think about the way that it brings up memories and it can comfort you. And, I loved writing those parts because I think that about food. There's, things that transport you back or, will always remind you of a certain person. Crying in H Mart is such a great example of that. Memory and grief and food and how it all works together in a very beautiful way. So I loved writing about it. Could have written again. I had to cut like 30,000 words out of this book. It was too long, so I probably went on a little bit too much about it.
I would have loved to read that whole book. You took on all the food stuff.
Yeah.
Jay Ryan, what do you think?
Oh,
Or your
yeah,
thoughts on that?
many of the same notes. I also cut down, I don't know how many 100 pages, maybe 200, to get the book down to the size it is now, 250.
It actually makes me feel so much better. I'm sorry you had to do it, but yeah.
Oh, that's all right. Yeah. And like you had whole point of view characters, like some of them are still in the book, just greatly reduced. Whole scenes, a lot more at Jorby's, which is a chain restaurant of family diner style restaurants. There was a lot more there in earlier versions. Because I grew up in a small town where the only 24-hour restaurant was Perkins. And we spent a lot of time at Perkins, like my high school friends and I during high school and after school.
What was Perkins like?
Like a
Like
Denny's,
what kind of restaurant was
like a
it?
Bob Evans. Yeah, I mean a little nicer than Bob Evans. It started as a bakery restaurant, and it was very pie centric once upon a time, or baked goods forward. And it's got further and further away from that as it progressed over the years. There's still some throughout the northern Midwest. They're dying out, but it was a big deal. My mom was a waitress at Perkins when I was a little kid before she went back to college and finished her English degree. And I thought Perkins was really cool. They had a rotating pie display. They had
those are so much fun.
they had something called a wishing well, which was this like bucket of toys that you could grab on your way out or on your way in or both. They had cigarette machines in the lobby. It was the kind of place where teens and truckers hung out at night. Families ate it during the day. And it had, it had everything. It didn't have alcohol, but it was, all day breakfast, that kind of joint. And I had a real push-pull, in my heart writing about the spread of chain restaurants and their effect on a community because I relied on this one so much as just a vital place to be indoors during Minnesota winters when you didn't want to be home and you couldn't be at school or there had to be a place to go, and Perkins was that place. Yeah, that we could go at 1 a.m. and have real conversation. And as such, it has value,
Oh, that's great. So both of your books move back and forth in time. So what was it like exploring the families at different points in their lives? I thought that was so interesting because you can like look back and look forward. And what did you how was that writing that? Did you like writing from the different time frames of the stories? Jennifer, why don't we?
Oh, I'll start. Yeah, I was going to jump in because I was reading Ryan's book and I think if I had read it before I written mine, I loved it, but I also I could get lost in this family because I think there was like 50 different books within this family. So I kind of had to cut out some different parts of it and focus on, a few characters and cut out some points of view. But it was great because it was just this restaurant means something completely different to each of them. And I love the idea, in families, how each sibling describes something and like they have a totally different experience of and so that was so fun to see how they all viewed each other and this restaurant and what it meant to them and, sort of what they felt like was their birthright, or they didn't want it. Was just, I just think that families are fascinating. So I loved that. And I had a lot, I did keep in one chapter from Rose, but there was a lot more because she was she was there from the beginning, and this was their dream. Her husband, she and her husband opened it. So I love when books do that. I just, so fun.
It's fun. Jay Ryan, what about you?
Me too. I felt I just had to do it. I wrote all of Mariel's chapters first. So I wrote her whole story. Then I thought, boy, Florence really doesn't get a fair shake from her daughter's perspective. Why would she? But I thought, I don't want Florence to be a straw woman. I don't want her to be a one-dimensional caricature like she comes across from her daughter's point of view sometimes. Because frankly, her daughter doesn't know her very well. And there's so much about Florence's life that she hasn't told her daughter. And I think her daughter would like her a lot more if she knew these. And so I want the reader to know those things. I wanted the reader to have the advantage of understanding Florence's psyche and the sort of inherited trauma that generated the behavior that, changed lives. So I set out to write all of Florence's chapters next after that. And after that, I thought, okay, I got her figured out. Now I just got to move on to Ned and then Julia. And I had a few other point of view people in there at one point that got weeded out kind of early, but it was always going to be Mariel and Florence. It was always going to be this mother-daughter story with each of them telling their side of the story in their words. And I thought that was very important to have the reader identify with them.
And in both of your books, you sort of brought this up a little bit, Ryan, is that while there are serious problems and issues, there was a fair amount of humor. And in Ryan, your book, you had sort of a sit-in for a period of time. So how, as writers, do you balance the two, the seriousness, like the grief part, but also you insert humor into the stories as well? Ryan, how do you do that as a writer?
It's
like a balancing act, I think.
Right, in terms of pacing. Just sort of feel in my gut, like, okay, it's time to laugh now, or hey, it's okay to drop a bomb right here. I think I just kind of move by touch and smell. I mean, I don't outline before I write. I know my ending and I work backwards from that. And then I'll just write whole character. I'll start in the middle usually. And so usually I get to a point where, it's okay, something needs to happen. Something sad hasn't happened in a while. Maybe it's time for a sad thing. Okay, we need to laugh because the sad thing just happened. Okay, what's fun? What can I bring in now? So I just kind of feel it out and then smooth it out later. To me, the act of writing a first draft is like going grocery shopping. And then the second draft is where you pick out the ingredients you're going to cook with. So I just have all these like bags of groceries sitting on my counter that I'm just kind of sifting through, and I decide, okay, I'm going to use you and just kind of figure it out on the fly.
Jennifer, what about you?
Really the same. I feel like I'm very much relating to Ryan. I also don't outline. And it's funny. I think when I first started writing in grad school, I had the sense of like who I thought I was going to be as a writer. And no matter what, like very serious, no matter what I wrote about, it always ended up being kind of funny. And finally I was like, why am I fighting this? This is, just lean in. And so, it's the same kind of thing. It's just sort of like maybe where you feel you need a break too. Because when you're writing it, you can get in those deep scenes and then you want to sort of come out of it. But it's just amazing. I don't know if any of you have read We All Want Impossible Things. Such a wonderful book. It is so funny. It is about hospice. And so it's like both of those things. And it is the most amazing balance of just how you could even find any, it's just wonderful. So I think it's just sort of feeling it out. And maybe when you feel sort of heavy, you add in something funny.
I got to read that book. That sounds right up my alley.
So great.
Who is the author?
I think it's Catherine Newman. I feel like I'm getting it wrong, so don't trust me.
All right.
Whoever's fact checking.
Yes. We All Want Impossible Things by Catherine Newman. Yes, you're correct.
Thank you, Meg.
Kathy has a question for you. Do you feel that you had to be a foodie to write your books?
I'm guessing I don't think either of us would have written them if we didn't enjoy food, because that would be so boring. Because I'm sure some people would not. Rumaan Alam writes about food so beautifully. Heartburn is one of my favorite books. I think some people, I don't think I would have ever written it. I don't think I had to be a foodie. I think it's just if it doesn't interest you, you would never come to it, I guess.
Hmm.
Well said. I completely agree.
Let's see some of the questions here. Okay, this is for you, Ryan. I've read all 3 of your books and love them. Until I looked it up, I didn't know that you were a man. How do you think you're able to capture a woman's voice so clearly? Can you talk about that?
Well, it's a real honor to hear that. I feel it's because my mom, is not only the person who taught me to write and gendered my earliest stories, but also she's the angel on my shoulder and my critic and the person I write for. That's some writers have readers that they think of when they write, and I have one, and I've only ever had one and only ever will, and it's my mom. And she passed away in 2005. So I'm writing to keep her alive, but also writing to put her back into stories where she can hang out with her friends again. And she wanted to be a novelist herself, and so I'm also, to some extent, I think, writing books that she would like to read, or books that to some extent maybe could contain elements she would have liked to have written. Certainly the sort of people I write about are people that I know my mom explicitly wanted to write about. So on one hand, I feel like, oh, I'm kind of having the career she wanted for herself, but it's, I'm just trying to honor her and put her in my stories and continue the work as a conversation with her, so she can participate in this too. But my book came, that box of books from my publisher came on the 18th anniversary of her death, to the day. And so, I thought about it, and I thought, opened up that box, and I said, "Oh, my mom's dead, but here she's still alive."
Oh, that's beautiful. Beautiful. All right, let's get to some more questions. Okay. This is a good one. When you're writing novels from multiple perspectives, how have you decided who to include? And how has that changed your stories as you write? That's a good one.
Yeah, I mean, I think from what we've talked about, a lot of it's trial and error, and some people end up on the cutting room floor.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's how it is for me. It's like I try not to think too much before I go in, or else I psych myself out. So it's just sort of like what voices catch on. And this sort of great thing about when you have the multiple perspectives, if you get a little stuck on one character, you can jump to the other. And I've always liked that, because it's some characters come a little easier and some don't. And then some pop up when you didn't know that they were going to be a part of it, which I think is sort of keeps you interested as you write.
Jay, Ryan, what do you think about that, writing multiple perspectives?
Wow. Well, someone cloned my writing brain. Or I'm a clone of Jennifer, I think, because I could have said many of the same things. Characters pop into my head fully formed. I love it when that happens, but it doesn't always happen.
Yeah.
And I procrastinate on chapters that are more difficult by writing one that's easier. I'll just go back and write more Florence. I love writing Florence. Like, Ned to me was really hard. That was the most difficult character to write.
Why was that difficult?
Oh,
why was he difficult to write?
Closest to me, like in terms of his attitude, and I kind of tried to put myself in his shoes in terms of what would happen if I was born into a family, like a corporate chain family, and where I was expected to inherit the family business, and the family business is a real business. It's not, I'm not putting on an apron and separating a chicken. I'm running a franchise of places in which people I'll never know do that work. And how would I react to that? Like, oh, not great. Yeah. It's like if the Prager family was on Succession, it would be a much more boring show. So I felt like Ned is me in a lot of ways, and that made him much more difficult to write, because, man, it just felt so cut and dried. I had a hard time figuring out where the drama would be with him. I had to give him things that weren't easy to, also because he's rich. I generally hate writing rich people because they're both. And anytime you can write a check and make your problems go away, it's just like, what, I don't know, like you're just inventing drama for these people because they can solve 99% of their problems with their checkbook. So yeah, and so with Ned, I was like constantly having to figure out problems I could give him that he could solve, and that was hard. But everyone else, like Julia, I loved writing Julia. Oh my God. Like I was only expecting that section to be like 8 pages, and it ended up being 40, and it could have been longer. Probably should have been. I was just getting to that point where I was starting to become my own critic and going, this book's getting too long again. My editor's gonna get mad. I don't want to make Pam mad. I better cut this off,
Here's a good question for the two of you, which actually I should have asked this. Are you both working on new novels, and will they include food or restaurant themes? Jennifer?
Not another restaurant, but it does take place at a country club. And so there is some parts of it, again, sort of with like the memory of certain foods that you eat there, like grilled cheese by the pool. Yeah, and I mean, I have to say, sometimes I have to watch it because I like when it sneaks in there of what I'm doing. And I always like, when I'm stuck, I'll always like, I guess I'll make my characters go out to dinner. So there's a lot of, but not quite as much. I don't know that I'll do another restaurant. I felt like I knew I was going to write a restaurant book for a long time, and this was maybe my one, but.
J. Ryan?
Yeah, it's not terribly likely at this point. I mean, there are food related topics I want to continue to explore, food and beverage, I should say, but yeah, it might be a while before another restaurant book, if ever.
Are you working on a new novel?
I haven't started writing it yet. I just have to think about it all the time. It drives me nuts. It's like sitting on an entire plane full of toddlers that aren't yours. And like your heart breaks for them, but also they're really, you can't get anything done. You can't read, you can't watch a movie, and there's nothing you can do about it. Like I just feel like I'm just driven to nearly fatal distraction by the fact that I can't sit down and start working on this book yet.
Okay, so here's a good question. You both set these books in the area where you grew up rather than where you live now. What's the pull of that? And if you have also set books where you currently live, Jennifer, which is easier and more attractive, will we ever see a California book from Ryan?
I realized that I did this. I think it's like laziness, where it's just like, if I know something well enough, I can just set it there. And in my first book, described the apartment where I first lived out of college in Chicago to such great detail that the girls that lived there a decade after me had read my book and recognized it. This is such a fun story. And they had the pages on the wall. They took them out of the book and hung them up on the wall. And one of my students from GW went to go visit them. It was her friends. And she was like, that's my writing teacher. So I've actually gotten into not trouble, but it's like, I just think it's easier. I don't even think about it. And then I'm like, oh, that was a real place I lived. This one, I knew I wanted it to be Chicago because I the Cubs were a big part of it. And I've written about DC, which, I probably won't do again. So I don't know. I mean, it's just, yeah. I think it starts with laziness with me, and then it's too late. Like I'm more interested in the characters and the story, but I did know I wanted this to be like really Chicago. This was one of my first real Chicago books. Yeah.
J. Ryan, will you ever have a setting in California?
Probably. Yeah, at least partially set there. Yeah, sooner or later, I think I'll get around to it. I mean, I don't know if I'll write an entirely California book. It's hard to say, but it's the most agile agricultural region in North America. It's hard to avoid. Yeah, I friggin' love living there from a food perspective. There's like, well, you can't get rhubarb or lefse, but there's a lot of other things that are fresh and amazing and accessible. So it seems likely.
Oh,
but
good.
In terms of writing about my home region, yeah, same thing. I mean, I guess it's laziness. I also just love Midwest set books. Growing up, I didn't see enough of them. Growing up in the Midwest, oh, there needs to be more of these. just hungered for any mention of the Midwest in a book, like the mention of Minnesota at the end of The Great Gatsby, that kind of thing. Like, oh yeah, my state's mentioned in a book. We're somebody. We're validated.
Oh.
There's a lot more now, thankfully, many more
Mhm.
Midwest writers in Midwest settings.
Mm,
And I just want to keep adding to that conversation.
mm. Okay, last question for you. If you each could create your absolutely perfect restaurant, what would it be?
I think mine
People
is
have-
Sullivan's. I think I did it. I really, the French fries I know are good. I know it has a good, I think that maybe that was it. I really think it has really good drinks and good food that's salty but delicious. Yeah.
Mm. Jay Ryan?
Yeah, I know. The Lakeside Supper Club is pretty dang attractive to me. I would like it personally if it was just a bit more locally sourced. I'm just a sucker for that kind of thing, like locally sourced and seasonal.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, those are trends I think are useful, not pretentious, but
Mhm.
useful. And it's a shame that right now they mostly exist in restaurants that have higher price points, because not that long ago was just how people ate by default. And yeah, I really want to I might have to write about a restaurant again, because I really want to write about it. Seasonal
We
menus,
changed your mind.
and eating what ought to be eaten at a time in which it should be eaten, like when that particular fruit or vegetable is growing and in season, and what to do when it's not. A lot of the world still eats like that, and
Mhm.
we've really gotten away, we've gotten towards expecting strawberries year round and so on.
Mhm.
And yeah, I don't know, I'm going down a rabbit hole here, but long story short, I think
You're discovering your new novel as you talk.
yeah, I know. And I hear I just said it wouldn't be at a restaurant.
Okay. I think we have 2 minutes. Okay. Where do you write, and are there snacks, beverages, or candles? What is the vibe when you are both writing your books? Jennifer?
Ryan, you start. I'm so curious. Maybe,
Oh, okay.
maybe
Yeah.
we do have the same
Oh.
writing brain. Yeah.
I write when my son is asleep. That's pretty much the one requirement these days. Before, I had all kinds of requirements, like it's got to be quiet. There's got to be, I used to be a morning writer. Now I'm a night writer. I heard a great interview with Clint Smith on NPR, the poet. He has a new poetry collection out that's come out since he's been a dad, and he talked quite a bit about how he's developed more provisional and ad hoc writing habits, and I've done the same. I can write pretty much anywhere now. Once I get started. I mean, of course, like most writers, I prefer a quiet room, and but one of the things is I don't eat when I write. I'll go 7 or 8 hours, and I'll just have like coffee and water and maybe an apple or something. So I'm starving most of the time when I'm writing. It occurred to me once that maybe that's why I write about food so much, because I really want it.
Jennifer, what's the vibe when you're writing? Do you have
Um,
snacks?
A lot of coffee, I always have water, because I feel like anything I can do, or otherwise I'll be like, I'm thirsty, like just any excuse not to get up. I used to eat, to be honest, sometimes I still do when it's getting towards like longer writing days. I used to years ago eat blow pops. when I was writing. I've now had like 2 root canals, so I don't do that anymore. I don't really snack while I eat. Actually, that's like, that's a break. But I will sometimes have a smoothie. I don't know, it's kind of boring, but I feel like because you really do need your hands to type, so you can't really snack while you're doing it. And I like writing at my desk. A lot of this book I had to write. We didn't have a permanent place to live during the pandemic, which is a whole maybe a novel down the line. So we were moving around a lot, and I had to get used to finding like, this is my writing space for the next 2 weeks. And first that drove me. I mean, I still would prefer not to do it, but I learned that I could do it. But I really just like one area. I don't like writing, anyway. So and
do you listen to
sometimes
music when you write, or you have to have it quiet?
I don't usually, I did sometimes for this because there was some 90s music in it. So sometimes I would play it just if I was, I don't know, trying to get into the writing mind, but mostly just quiet. I don't know if you.
I also have to say that the band name Donna Martin Graduates, I that was great.
Oh, that's the
I
first time I've
love
heard it said.
that.
I read it as the Donna Martin Graduates.
Oh, so were you
Like,
not a
as a plural,
90210 fan?
So like,
Yeah.
there was a school called Donna Martin, you know, and they were we're graduates of Donna Martin, you know. I seriously thought that. Yeah.
Not a fan of 90210, Ryan.
Oh, I
Okay,
guess
so
not.
Leslie's
Yeah,
not-
no, I totally missed it. I didn't watch
Uh,
TV during the 90s. And so, yeah, okay. So that's a
It
90210.
was just a very dramatic episode where they
Oh
all
my God.
chanted. Yeah.
Hilarious, hilarious. Well,
Yes.
okay. So therefore you hit a demo where you know, they missed the 90s television and this is how it was read. Still enjoyed it. Thought it was a great band name. Just totally missed the reference.
Thank you.
I got a big chuckle out of that. I was like, that is so good.
Yeah.
Good one. Leslie's back.
I'm back. This was great. Thank you all so
Wow,
much.
that hour went by so quickly.
Yeah, it went by so
Goes by so
quickly,
fast.
and you guys had such great answers. I was going to throw in there that I worked in food service for about 10 years, and I thought it was some of the best training actually for my journalism job. So now I'm a reporter, and you know, you wouldn't think they have that much to do with each other, but it's that timing. It's now. You need to do it now, not tomorrow, not in 20 minutes. That person needs water now. That deadline is now. So
I like that, Ryan. You said that there's always a clock ticking. That's so true. I never
Right.
thought of it that way, but that's absolutely true.
Yeah, and the clock is now ticked to the end of the literary festival.
Oh man.
Thank you all so much for being here. And thank you to everyone who came today to this session, to every session, to all the volunteers and authors and steering committee. That's a wrap. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much. This was wonderful, wonderful conversation. So much fun.
And yeah, I hope you all have a great evening.
Yes.
And
Yes. Go eat. Go eat now. After we
we'll
talked about
see you in
food for an hour.
2024. Good night.
All
Take
right.
care, everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.